Hello and welcome to the Cardiac Cats YouTube channel. I'm your host, Jacob Shorba, and today we're going to be discussing the topic of how the Jaguars can replace Calvin Ridley in 2024 if he walks in free agency. So, we're going to go through kind of the situation right now, what we know as of February 22nd. That's when I'm recording this. Maybe some things will update by the time this video goes out. And then we're going to talk about what I have as four options on how they can react to this if he does walk in free agency. And then we're going to evaluate what we think is best. I'm going to give you my rundown on what I would do in this situation. And that's going to be what we talk about today. So we're going to go ahead and jump into it by just explaining where we're at right now. So we know pretty much for a fact that Calvin Ridley is going to hit the free agent market. It's very unlikely that he is officially a member of this team before then. Because, for one, the franchise tag will not be available. It's going to get used on Josh Allen. That's really clear right now. They are not close to a contract extension at all. And the conversations didn't even start until hopefully just recently. That's best case scenario. I mean, for all we know, they might not even be started by now. Just because the Jaguars really haven't done a whole lot with the situation. They've kind of ignored it more so, which is shocking, but is what it is. And so the franchise tag isn't going to be an option, and the Jaguars aren't going to want to sign him before free agency because Calvin Ridley would cost them a second round pick then. If he hits the market, Calvin Ridley will cost the Jaguars a third round pick. And so what they're doing right now is they're trying to negotiate the scenario, talking about, okay, this is what we'd offer you. Let's work that all out. And then if you hit the market, you get a bigger offer, we'll try to sort it out and you can go to that other team, or maybe we'll offer more. Whatever ends up happening happens, right? But they're trying to plan for it. And so there are negotiations going on between the two sides right now. So that's where we're at. Now, our four options here. We're going to start with kind of doing this chronologically almost. So we'll talk about like free agent topics. Then we're going to talk about draft topics. And list some players that you might target. So we're going to start first with free agency, going bargain shopping. And so is this approach going to get you a player as good as Calvin Ridley? It's very unlikely. I think you're going to have a hard time doing that in the first place, especially for just how good this player would be in 2024. For me, like with Calvin Ridley, it's really a matter of money. That's where I just don't know whether I'd re-sign him or not yet. But if he's back on the Jaguars, I have a lot of reason to believe he's going to be much more productive than he was this year because he's going to be in the system for another season. It's going to be a much better situation because the rest is going to be knocked off now. So it's going to be hard to find a player of similar value. So you're trying to find the best deal that you can while not breaking the bank. You want to help out your cap situation a little bit, being smart about who you go after. And so a couple options to throw out. If you want to go for younger guys that, I think have like really high upside but might be a little more expensive, I think you could look at Gabe Davis out of Buffalo. I personally wouldn't do that just because I think he's way too boom or bust, but he would be an option. You could bring him back to Florida as well. Was the guy who went out to UCF in college. You could also talk about Marquise Brown or Hollywood Brown. He's nearly 27 now, but still a younger player. I think he just completed his fifth year in the NFL. Wasn't as productive with the Cardinals, but he is an electric receiver. He has definitely had games where you can see that he has the potential to be a guy who changes an offense and elevates it, but it just wasn't consistent with Arizona. They had problems with, Kyler Murray getting hurt and who's throwing the ball to him. And I think even like for Hollywood Brown, he got hurt himself at one point, either this season or the year before. And so there's a lot of reasons why it never really worked out. But these are both receivers that you could imagine there's a scenario where they really perform well on another team and everything just kind of comes together. Now, where would I go with it? Personally, whether or not Calvin Ridley is re-signed or not, I'm not really looking to keep Zay Jones, so this will be a target of mine I will mention throughout the way up to free agency, but I do think Kendrick Bourne is the most logical fit for the Jaguars. And here's my reasoning for that. Bourne is a player that the Jaguars wanted before. This was the other guy they were targeting during that period of negotiations where they finally got Calvin Ridley through a trade. This was their other option. They clearly have interest in him. They clearly see him as a player with value. Kendrick Bourne has been a solid starter throughout his career in different situations. This season, although he got hurt, although he suffered an injury, this was his best season as a player. As far as his production, what he was doing each game, he was in a really bad offense that he was helping to elevate. And so this is a guy you bring in who's going to start. He's going to play pretty well. I think he's going to fit the mold of what Jacksonville's looking for. Going to be someone you can go deep to, really good catcher. He's not an elite athlete or anything, right? But he manages to find ways to get open, to make the catches, to make the big plays. And so this is a player who will bring value to Jacksonville, and he will be affordable as well. Right now, he's projected around $7 million a year. I think you could get him maybe even for $6 million. Because he is coming off the injury, so that's got to be factored in a bit. It was a big injury. It was an ACL. That does suck, right? But you take that to your advantage sometimes in how you negotiate the contract. So Kendrick Bourne, he'd be my top option in this scenario. I think he'd be a really good fit in Jacksonville. But that's one way you could go about it. You could just look at the free agents, find your guy, maybe not a long-term option, but just someone who can fill in right now while you wait maybe for a trade to come available, or maybe a draft pick that you make that ends up being really good value, something else, right? But this is a short-term solution. So let's talk about our second idea here, and that's to make a bold move, and that would be for Higgins specifically. Now, I know he's getting franchise tag. He's going to be back on the Bengals. That does not mean that the Jaguars cannot negotiate a trade for him. If they want Higgins really bad, they can go get him. Now, I think it's going to be expensive. I think it's going to be a lot to pay. But the argument for doing it is that once you get that guy, even if you have to pay a lot for him, you got to give him the contract, you got to give him the first-round pick, are you going to regret having T. Higgins on your team with Trevor Lawrence, Travis Etienne again? You fill the one specific need you have in your receiving core as well, with a downfield threat, reliable hands, someone who can be electric for the offense in that way. I don't know if you regret that. I think there is absolutely a better scenario keeping the pick, and we're talking about probably your first and then getting something in return, because I do think 17 is a bit rich, but 48 is so far off from what the value would be. You'd probably have Cincinnati sending a pick back in return, maybe a third rounder, something like that. So I think at some point, you'd feel okay about this trade down the road. But there's a better scenario where you go out, you make a great pick at 17, you get a great player, and that should be the expectation. And you don't have to pay that player a ton of money. You don't have to pay him the 20, 25 million that Higgins is going to earn. So there's an argument for this and an argument against. I would personally not do this, but there's another reason why I say that. I think it's something you guys need to know as fans. The way the franchise tag works, the second year you do it, if they wanted to franchise tag him again next year, it goes up, I believe, 20%. Or if the new value of the franchise tag just for any player is higher than that, they go with the higher value. So next season, if the Bengals want to franchise tag Higgins again, it is $26 million. Okay? It's a lot of money. Is Higgins worth $26 million? It is really close. When he is who he's supposed to be, when he's healthy, when he's playing his best, I think he's about there. But I do not know that a team like the Cincinnati Bengals, who has historically been cheap, although obviously just paid Burrow a ton of money, they had to do that, right? They're not committal to this. They want to probably bring him back for 1 year to try to make the championship run. I don't think they franchise tag him the next year. I think what happens is I think Higgins ends up walking, or he gets traded midseason if something goes wrong in Cincinnati, Burrow gets hurt again, whatever it is. That's possible. And I got to say that, unfortunately, because half of Burrow's seasons, he has gotten taken out for the year. So that is possible. Not wishing it, though. Higgins is probably going to hit the free agent market next year. And if he's going somewhere and Jacksonville has an opening and there's not too much money invested in a receiver, you think he'd want to come to Jacksonville? I think he would. I think that would absolutely be the case. So with T. Higgins, don't give up hope yet. Next year, it's very possible that he could end up making his way to Jacksonville the way things work out. Now, if he plays incredible and plays himself into that huge contract, well, he probably gets tagged and traded, realistically. So maybe that's kind of where we are right now. But I think you just got to play the waiting game with this because Cincinnati's going to be in win-it-now mode. And they got a year or two left of the cheap contracts. Jamar Chase, this is the final year before he gets the fifth-year option, the extension, all that. Burrow is going on his fifth-year option this year as well. So the money is going to run out for the Cincinnati Bengals. So that would be the approach I would take. I would not make the bold move right now. I'd play the waiting game because I think you're going to win that game at the end of the day. Now let's talk about the draft. There's two options here. First one's to trade up in the draft. And if you follow me on Twitter or X, you will know that I am an advocate of this idea as long as the player doesn't get taken way too early from where they're expected to go. I think right now, we're talking about Malik Neighbors and Rome Odunze. They're probably going at 6th overall is probably the earliest either one goes. I think the Chargers probably end up going in the direction of Brock Bowers, or I think they end up maybe trading out of that spot with a team that wants a quarterback. Might be J.J. McCarthy. I know that's disgusting to say, but there are a lot of teams that like J.J. McCarthy there that would move up for him. So that's very much possible. We also have other players in this draft class on the defensive side of the ball that are now making their way up into that top 10 discussion that might end up being a pick around this point. You know, you look at Dallas Turner, for example. You look at Terrion Arnold and his athleticism. Nate Wiggins, his length, the hustle on the field. There's not really a whole lot of limitations on those players. And you could try to make the argument as a team that those players might be more valuable and you might prefer them over some of these options. So you might not have to trade up to maybe 6th overall or 7th overall, and you're not trading to 7 because the Titans are there. So maybe on draft day, you're sitting there, you're monitoring the situation, you're looking at a team like Atlanta that picks number 8, and you go out, you offer him your 1st and your 2nd, maybe a 4th in there, something like that, and you go make your move for what you think is an elite wide receiver. And I think in this draft class, you have at least 3 guys at the top of the board who are wide receiver ones at the next level. And I think all 3 of them are that in their first year in the NFL. I think Marvin Harrison Jr. should be no discussion. He's going to be that guy, hopefully for Arizona. That's where I want him to go personally. With Rome Odunze, the ability to just every clutch moment, every big moment of the game, to come in and make the play. He is going to be a wide receiver one. He will be a quarterback's best friend. And Neighbors, when I watch him, I'm not saying he's going to be the exact same talent level, but he reminds me of Justin Jefferson in the way he plays. Versatile player as well, can play all over, super shifty. This guy isn't even 21 years old. There are so many options at the top of this draft, whatever your preference is, that you could consider moving up for one of these players if they fall down the board, which I think is very much possible. So this is another option. And for me, I'd probably just see if they fall to 8. I would move up to 6 if I didn't have to give up a future first and I didn't have to give up too much this year. It depends on what you have to give up. And in some scenarios, that might just be way too much. So I'd be watching it. Even if you get Calvin Ridley back, this would be something in my consideration because I think you have wide receiver one options available and not the normal wide receiver ones, but the elite ones. I think you're going to get 3 out of this class and you're going to be really happy if you land any of those players. In a year or 2 from now, I don't think you regret that trade. So that's one option. And the final option is take one of the best of the rest. So this would be an A.D. Mitchell. This could be a Xavier Legette. It could be Brian Thomas at 17. There are a lot of players you can throw out here. You could even talk about like day 2, late day 2, even early day 3. There is a very deep wide receiver class this year with a ton of players that can make an impact for a team. There's so many options available. You hope you get the right one, but you have plenty of options to choose from, plenty of opportunities. These players are going to be on the board for a while on draft day. And so maybe if Jacksonville doesn't want to go give up a ton of extra draft capital to go really risk a lot for that, although I think they're safe risks. I think you've got a clear reward moving up for one of those top 3 players. Are you going to complain if you get an A.D. Mitchell? You know, you might move back a little bit for him, but that's a good pick. That's a player who's probably going to be very good in the NFL. Brian Thomas Jr. with some refinement. Going to be a very good deep threat in the NFL. Very good complement to this offense for what they need. These are all options to replace Calvin Ridley. Heck, you want to throw out another name? I think this would be interesting to throw out, although he is pretty undersized as far as weight. I was reading something about Xavier Worthy. He bases his entire game off the way Calvin Ridley plays. Bases route running off it. That is like his favorite player in the NFL. There's so many people you can target to try to replace that void, whether you want the same kind of player, someone different. You know, you could even throw out Troy Franklin if you're looking for a similar player. I think Franklin is similar to Calvin Ridley, just with, well, quite frankly, more length at the end of the day. And then obviously not going to have experience coming in like what Calvin Ridley has now, but still really good player. So this is the other option. I think you're going to get a good receiver in the draft. You're going to have that opportunity to go get that. Whether you're getting the 4th guy off the board, you're getting the 8th or 9th in the 2nd round, moving up or picking where you are. There's a lot of options available there. So these are 4 paths that we can go. Now I want to give you my thoughts on how I would treat this. For me, I would be preparing a deal right now, like they are, that the team can afford. I don't want to do anything too ridiculous, but I would probably offer up to around $20 million a year. You look at Christian Kirk's deal, he's performing up to that. It's a good deal. He was going to be nearly a 1,200-yard receiver this year. He gets paid $18 million. Calvin Ridley put up 1,016 yards healthy. I think the number is going to go up. I would offer him a little more than Kirk, but I won't go much higher because the value is very close in the 2 players. And so I'd offer him something like that. And I think Ridley wants to stay with the Jaguars. I think he wants to stay with the same team. If you're close, and you're the team that took a bet on him, you're the team that went and traded for him and believed in him, I think you might get him back. But if you don't, if Ridley walks, and that's this whole scenario, I would go sign Kendrick Bourne in free agency, shore it up for now. I'd be looking in the draft. I'd check value. I would very much consider trading up. But what I'm banking on is probably that long-term play to try to go after a guy like T. Higgins, who now, the way the Bengals are playing this, might play himself out of Cincinnati and might not cost the team anything other than the contract to go get him in free agency. So those are my thoughts on this, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. You know, hopefully this all gets resolved and Calvin Ridley's back and it's affordable and everything's great, right? That's what we want to happen, or most of us at least. I know some people would rather get another player. That's fine. But ideally, that's what I'd like to happen. Hopefully we get a good outcome out of this and the team's looking good at wide receiver and gives Trevor Lawrence the chance that he deserves. So we'll see what happens. But I appreciate y'all watching this video. Hope you have a great weekend. We're going to have 2 more videos coming out the next 2 days. And then throughout the week, probably just upload on Wednesday, get back to it on the weekend. That's all I've got. Have a great day. And finally, go Jags.